Welcome to yet another episode of Ancient Geeks, a podcast in which two friends who are geeks journey back in time to our younger, geekier selves when all the geeky things that are now part of mainstream popular culture were still on the fringes. We were geeks before it was chic, and I'm Tom Grant, your co-host, and I'm a beast who shouts love at the heart of this podcast.
And I'm Stephen Taylor, and I have no joke, but maybe this fits the theme.
Oh, that's good. All right. Well, we're going to be doing not just one, not just two, but three episodes on Harlan Ellison. We'll explain more.
Maybe four.
Maybe four. Who knows? Who knows? This might turn into the Harlan Ellison podcast. But before we slide down that slippery slope.
Then we could just change the name to Grumpy Old Men and be done with it.
That's right. Well, we're almost there.
Yes.
What have you been doing lately that is geek adjacent, Stephen?
Just reading Harlan Ellison stories. I have had no time for anything else, really, to be totally honest. So
Yes.
I have no new geekery to report of any consequence. How about yourself?
Well, I should say that we have done a ton of research for this series of episodes, including TV shows, a movie, you name it, that had something to do with Harlan Ellison. I was digging through the storage unit the other day, and I found, much to my
The Lost
delight,
Ark?
No. I got rid of that in a move. I found the Science Fiction Writers of America 1979 membership directory.
Mm.
So if you don't know what the Science Fiction Writers of America is, I think it's pretty obvious from the name. I used to call it SIFWA, if memory serves. Anyway, and this was, if you were a SIFWA member, you could put your name and address into this directory. And I assume this was for correspondence among writers. And so if you wanted to write a letter to Isaac Asimov or Joe Haldeman or Andre Norton or whomever, you could use this directory for that. So it's a kind of cool artifact of a classic era of science fiction, including artists too. I would say that artists and TV related people and so forth. So that's my geeky thing. I'm not going to put this on the internet so that I violate people's privacy, nor am I going to abuse the use of this. I will only use it for good, I promise, which is means sitting on my shelf.
Collecting dust.
Collecting dust, yes. Dust needs to be collected. All right. What soundtrack, if we could afford it, would you choose for this episode of the podcast?
The one for this episode, I'm going to go with Frank Sinatra's My Way.
Oh, good one. Okay. I was looking for Angry Young Man songs, and The Who were not going to take it. I wasn't actually angry enough, so I picked, there's an Irish group, the Tossers, have the song Good Morning Da. That's my pick.
There we go.
All right.
This might give us some hint of where we're going with today's discussion.
All right. So we're doing these episodes on Harlan Ellison, and we're going to divide them up by different aspects of Harlan. First the person, then the writing, and then the adaptations. And as we said, we might even do a fourth episode depending on how things go. Why are we doing this deep dive on Harlan Ellison? It's because he is an important figure in the history of science fiction and fantasy, or if you prefer, speculative fiction. That's what he described himself to be, a speculative fiction writer, not a science fiction writer or a fantasy writer. But I think it's safe to say he went to science fiction conventions, he was published in science fiction magazines, et cetera, et cetera. So he was definitely part of the science fiction world. He was also one of the first, I would say, literary science fiction writers. So rather than saying science fiction is about scientific fiction, that it's about taking scientific ideas and translating them into an interesting story, or trying to educate originally people in science by telling science fiction stories or telling pulp stories or whatever. This was an effort to write serious fiction. He wasn't necessarily the first person to do this, but I think he was one of the most prominent people to attempt to be taken seriously as a writer. Would you say that's fair?
No, I think it's totally fair. Yeah, yeah. I think as we go through this conversation, especially now and into the next episode, which will be about his short stories, we'll have some. I'll have some things to say. I'm sure you will as well about this whole speculative fiction versus sci-fi thing, and how literary he is. I mean, and how all this may or may not mean about his work. I think there's a lot to
Right.
say.
Yeah, we'll have some critical things to say, just as
Yes,
a bit of
yes.
foreshadowing. Uh, did leave his stamp on science fiction writing, his own writing,
Hmm.
his contacts with other people in the science fiction community, his mentoring of people as science fiction writers, his Dangerous Visions anthology and its follow up. So he's important in that way as well. And I think at the time, because I was very aware, as will become clear, of Harlan Ellison when I was in my teens and early 20s, that people treated his fiction as special. You can see it in the awards, which we'll
Yes,
do a rundown of that. But it's like, oh, this magazine has a Harlan Ellison story in it,
yes. That's true.
or
That's true.
oh, Harlan Ellison's going to be at the convention and he's going to give a talk. So people were highly respectful, highly reverent of Harlan Ellison during this time,
And plus,
and
Harlan told him they had to be.
they had to be. And he was also a personality. And that's really the
Yes,
first part of
yes.
our coverage is going to be Harlan Ellison, the personality. So not just like his own persona when you'd see him, his sort of wisecracking, confrontational sort of personality, but also like the famous stories, which we'll get into about him jousting with TV and movie executives or editors or you name it. There was really nobody like him. So in that sense, I think he definitely deserves very serious treatment on this podcast and by anybody who's looking at the history of science fiction and fantasy.
Yeah, and I think I would go ahead and add at the top. I know we're going to come to this later, but I think it needs to be stressed because it's grown in my mind over this sort of research. I mean, Harlan also had some controversial behavior, some negative behavior. He was,
Hmm.
and some of I think what he was often lionized is not quite the right word, but his mythology, his legend. I mean, some of it upon retrospect is, I don't think, as respectable, especially if he did it now. I don't
Right.
know that he would have been able to get away with some of the things he got away with, so, shall we say?
Yeah.
And I think that that's all part of this complicated legacy. I think it's also sort of interesting to me the question about where he is now, even in this sort of pantheon, because most of his work, even though he was a very prolific writer, which I'm sure we'll underscore as time goes on here, most of his work is out of print, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And I was
And
kind of
unfortunate.
surprised and unfortunate.
Yeah.
When the edited volume we'll talk about that J. Michael Straczynski edited,
Hmm.
he starts out his intro talking about if you've never heard of this guy, here's why you should know who he is. That's sort of striking to me because he was so prominent, but he is sort of he burned brightly, I guess, and has somewhat faded for various reasons. And I think we'll talk about some of those reasons over time. And maybe it's because he was a short story writer, among other things. But anyhow, we'll go on from there.
Yeah, and I'll say that what we're doing here is a little bit artificial. That in separating in one episode talking about Harlan Ellison, the person, from Harlan Ellison in the next episode, the writer and his written work. Because really those two things were of a piece back in the day. So Harlan the person, Harlan the author, he was a personality, a character, right?
Hmm.
And I think
Yes.
like people would say, well, who is this guy, right? They'd encounter him somehow, watching Tom Snyder interviewing him. Or going to a science fiction convention and seeing him in person or whatever, and say, "Oh, okay, so I want to find out about this guy, particularly since he gets so much good press." And then, a lot of his writing certainly pointed to him as a person. Kind of there were breadcrumbs in his writing that, kind of led to kind of trying to seek out what this Harlan guy was all about.
Hmm.
But we're going to do this artificial separation because we can't do everything in a single episode.
You can't do everything all at once everywhere.
That's right. Well,
I
that's
said
what
that wrong, but that's
Richard
okay.
Feynman said is the purpose of time. So everything
Yes.
doesn't happen all at once.
There we go.
All right. So when I say he was a respected writer, let's run down through his awards. So he won 8 Hugo Awards, and was certainly nominated for more. So the Hugos, if you don't know it, are the award, kind of the big marquee awards every year given for best short story, best novel, and whatever for science fiction and fantasy. 4 Nebulas, which are a little different from the Hugos because where the Hugos are voted on by a broad swath of people, including lots and lots of fans, the Nebulas are voted on by writers. And so, that's I think there is a added cachet to getting a Nebula Award on top of getting Hugo Awards. Both are great. So 8 Nebulas, sorry, 8 Hugos, 4 Nebulas, 5 Bram Stoker Awards for horror, 2 Edgar Awards for mystery, 2 World Fantasy Awards. He was by the Science Fiction Writers of America. He was elevated to the level of Grandmaster eventually. He won the World Fantasy Award for Lifetime Achievement, and there are others. So one of the most lauded writers ever in the genre.
No, he did. Yes, absolutely. And to your point, though, and I think we'll come back to this, despite the fact that he would bristle at the science fiction label, he's clearly
Yes.
swimming in science fiction waters
Oh, definitely.
and definitely not rejecting awards because they're science fiction awards.
Wait a minute. This isn't a speculative fiction award.
That's right.
Get this out of here. How would you summarize Harlan Ellison, the persona?
Well, and I don't know how much is persona, how much is the person, but he was a uh, he was an angry, grumpy, um, opinionated, uh, self-important person, I think is the words that come to mind.
And he would
He
not
could
take
be
offense at that.
he could
I
be
mean, he said it of
amusing,
himself.
sure. Those that what would you add to that list before I sit here and struggle for more words?
No, I think that's very accurate. There's something more though, and it's hard to
Yes.
catch into words. I mean, he is sort of like a human battering ram, or was. I mean, he passed away. We haven't said that, but he passed
Yeah.
away several years ago. Um, just
2018, correct?
yeah. So if you're going to say like force of nature or whatever, I mean, that's not a bad description either. But he was an angry young man back when he first started as a writer. He became an angry middle-aged man,
Hmm.
and then an angry old man.
Yes.
And those aren't necessarily distinct phases of his life. Um, I think he had,
No.
yeah,
No, I mean, that just made me think, right? Yeah, we'll talk about this movie, this documentary that was made about him, um, Dreams with Sharp Teeth. But he
yes,
says that he's always angry, right?
yeah. He
Um,
he's always seemed to treat writing as a crusade. He wanted, as he
yes.
said, he wanted to elevate writing to a level of science fiction writing to a level of respect and significance that hadn't been granted in decades past. But also wanted to say that writing was sort of almost like joining a holy order. Like there was some sort of responsibility that you had as a writer to write well, to talk about important things, to be true to your craft.
Yes. He would also talk about it like he talked about it as work, as something
Yes.
you work at. I think, I mean, I do believe that there's again, I mentioned the word self-important. So look, I think writing is very important.
Hmm.
But I think that Harlan definitely rode that sort of self-importance about his craft in a way that was sometimes significant and maybe endearing is also something obnoxious, right? That he was just that he because I think he often implied himself the writer, like he was the writer's writer. I think in some ways in his own mind,
Yeah.
right? So yes, but I think that's absolutely the case.
Yeah. He was also very eloquent,
Yes.
very erudite.
Yes.
He could kind of whip references out of the air and
Yes.
stitch them, into a very well-crafted sentence, unlike the one I just spoke.
No, yeah. He
As
was a
I
very
stumble over the words, talking about how good word guy Harlan Ellison was. No, he was.
grunt. No, he was very intelligent. He was very well spoken.
Yeah.
He could make an argument in the moment. Now, often that argument was fueled with emotion and maybe wasn't as logical as he thought it was.
Mhm.
But and he was pugnacious in the way in which he presented himself, without any doubt whatsoever.
Yeah. There's a great quote by Robert Bloch, the writer, that Harlan Ellison is the only living organism I know whose natural habitat is hot water.
Yes,
I think that was probably the best description of
that's
my,
perfect. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
better than my stumbling, hemming and hawing description. All right. When did you first become aware of him or his works?
So I think, like most people, or a lot of people, the first work that I encountered was Sitting on the Edge of Forever, which is a Star Trek script, which we'll talk about in much more
Mhm.
detail in a future installment of this conversation. I didn't know at the time. I could read his name on the screen. I didn't know who he was, but truly encountering Harlan Ellison, understanding in some degree who he was when I was in high school in California, listening to something we've mentioned before on the podcast, the radio show Hour 25, and Harlan would be a guest on Hour 25. And sort of to your point that you made a moment ago in describing the way in which people react to Harlan, he was someone I always enjoyed being on the program because he was entertaining. He was dynamic. He had stories to tell and things to say. He could be pugnacious, as I said. He could even, he could be provocative, but he was definitely a great talk show guest, right?
Yes.
And so it was always exciting for him, and that led me to find some of his work at that point. But that's when I started reading some of his short stories at that point in time. How about yourself?
I think I encountered him first through the written word, through his books.
Okay.
And since I've been on my safaris to used bookstores, actually scored a couple of them. There was this Pyramid Ellison series of books.
Hmm.
They were actually numbered, and I think those were the first ones that I found. It was, in a bookshop. It might have been actually in our bookshop, but anyway. So and I'd heard people talk about him a little bit,
Right.
and so it was in the air. And I should mention, by the way, something that is a habit that's very easy to slip into is calling him Harlan. And that's
Hmm.
kind of a sign of how important the persona was, and it just, kind of how affectionately he was treated. That, like, you're kind of
Hmm.
habituated, if you're our age and you grew up reading science
Right.
fiction and fantasy, to call him Harlan, not Ellison, if you want the
Right.
shortcut for
Right.
speaking about him. You don't do that with Larry Niven,
I call him
Robert
Lair,
Heinlein. I don't call Robert Heinlein Bob. I don't
Bobby and Lair.
I don't
Yeah.
say Ursula,
Ike.
but Ike.
Ike Asimov. That's what I always called him.
Ike and Mike. Who would Mike be?
I don't know.
Excuse me.
Anyway, yeah,
Anyway,
that's right. It's like Cher,
you're right.
Harlan.
Exactly. So Harlan. Um, so I read his work. I was impressed by it, but just how different it felt from a lot of other writers.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It did.
And then I kind of that all snowballed, because then
Sure.
going to conventions in Southern California, where he was a regular presence,
Right.
saw him a couple of times, continued to read his works. His works were much more readily available then than it
Sure.
is now. In fact,
Yes.
aside from this Pyramid series, there were other imprints of his like short story collections that I had. Anyway, so that's where I first encountered him.
Well,
Did
no, I
he
mean, I think
stand?
that
Yeah,
the
go
first
ahead.
book that I think that I purchased, which was Stalking the Nightmare. I mean, it was it's a mass imprint paperback at the
Yes.
time, right? Um, so yeah, and there's so many stories. What was it, 1,700 published works, something like that? I mean, I
Yeah,
can't imagine being Harlan
immensely
Ellison
prolific writer.
completist. Um, so, but I think also it's for a little more context, right? So when you're a teenager in this era of your life, I mean, he's become not only is he becomes sufficiently successful as to be well known, but he also is a fixture in the Los Angeles, Southern California area, right? I
Right.
mean, he's really sort of a local celebrity in that sense, especially in the
Hmm.
SFF world, correct?
Yes. Oh, most definitely. Yeah, and I think that his writing style certainly stood out.
Sure.
We'll have
No, it's
more to say
different.
about that in the next episode when we go through
Yes.
some of his stories.
I
Um,
mean, he's unlike anything else that I read at the time. I think that is true. Although again, I've come to see certain patterns in the way that he writes. But when you first, I think, and here's my experience in this sense, to try to keep it within the theme of what we're talking about right now, rather than
mhm.
going off on a tangent as I want to do. Um, I think that if, I'm reading, I don't know, how old am I at this point? I'm 16, 15, I don't know. So when I first encountered his work, it just did read differently than other authors that I was reading at the time, right? And I think at the time I was convinced of the notion that it was in this sort of liminal space between sci-fi, as I understood it, be it Asimov or Heinlein or whatever,
Hmm.
and more literary stuff that I was not as interested in reading at the time. Now, I think, and I think we're going to come back to this, but I'm going to say that at the time I accepted this notion that speculative fiction was the right label because it sounded more intellectual and highfalutin.
Yes.
Having read a lot of it lately, I'm not sure what it's speculating about, so I'm not so sure that it's speculative in any particular way. I'm not sure. I think it is. Actually, I've decided. I'll go ahead and jump to this. I've decided that in some ways, magical realism applies to his writing far more
Oh,
than
yeah.
speculative fiction
Yeah.
or anything else. But definitely at the time, it did feel different. And I think one of the things that I'm kind of getting at as I hem and haw through my brain, I think that when you're 15 or 16 years old, or however, you're a teenager and you're a sci-fi fan, and you first read Ellison, it makes you feel like you've hit some sort of new intellectual level or something, right? It's like, oh,
Yes.
this is more than just about robots and spaceships. And I think especially if you are entranced by Ellison's personality at the time,
Hmm.
he's inviting you into a club where we're all smarter than these other people. Then that's really part of his shtick, right? That he's smarter than the guys in Hollywood. He's smarter than the editors. He's smarter than everybody, quite frankly, except himself. And I think that especially as a younger person, I think was somewhat intriguing that you're kind of being lit in the secret society that you like understand.
Right.
Although exactly what you learn from the stories is a different discussion, which we'll talk about later. But I mean, does that make any sense to you, or does that
Yeah, yeah, but
resonate?
then also interestingly, he turns on that idea
Yeah.
and about how science fiction fans are not necessarily special people.
Oh no, he doesn't. He like. Oh no, his love hate with the fans is
Yeah.
public hate, but the fact that there's a symbiosis here, buddy. Right? You can't
Yes.
you can't be a
Well, anyway,
successful
we'll get
writer
to
without
that.
fans.
We'll
Oh
get
yeah,
to
we'll
that.
get to that. Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, it was interesting at that impressionable time in my life. I mean, I did get a sense that he was saying convincingly, you should ask more out of your fiction. Yeah.
Right.
And, I think that a lot of, again, at my tender age of whatever, 15, to have someone, kind of keep name dropping bits of literature
Right.
or history and
Right.
so forth, it was probably a good thing, that, maybe I'd read something that wasn't Edgar Rice Burroughs after finishing
Sure.
his book, as much as I still enjoy Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Well, I
But
mean,
yeah, just saying that there's more you should expect from the things you
right.
spend your time and money on.
But I think that's totally fair. I think
Hmm.
something that, but I also think it's true with Ellison, um, is that I'm not as convinced as perhaps I was when I was 15. Actually, this is absolutely the case that I agree with his sentiment. I'm not as convinced that what he wrote produced what he claimed to produce, whether it's his TV
Yeah.
or short stories or anything else. I think they're good. They're interesting. They made me think about certain things about the stories themselves. But the degree to which that he has provided a window into truth is a whole other discussion that we'll have later. But anyway,
Right. Well,
um,
to be honest, I mean, we encountered this at a point in our own maturation.
Yes.
where we saw an arc of not just ourselves maturing,
Right.
but also our feelings about this very pivotal figure in
Yes.
the kind of fiction that we loved, or TV shows that we
Right.
loved, or other appearances of his works. Anyway, kind of the maturity of our responses to him also develop. All right, well,
Yes.
let's kind of go back to Ellison, the persona.
Yes.
Is there anything you would cite as being like a good resource, like one place to go to understand Ellison, the persona?
Yeah, I would say that at least of the readily available material, I would say go to YouTube and Google Tom Schneider and Harlan Ellison and watch him
Yeah,
talk.
the Tomorrow
That's
Show. Yeah.
tomorrow's show. That's quintessential of who he
Yes.
was in public, more than really anything else that I can think
And he was
of.
on that show a lot. So
Yes.
yeah, there's a lot to draw from there.
Yeah, for a dude that had a lot of the negative things to say about TV, he liked to be on TV quite a bit.
Oh, that was in my notes.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. But again, I feel like that's not surprising given how important his persona was
Or
to
yes.
everything about Harlan Ellison, right? So, like you can't really separate them. Like, okay, if he's going to be this force of nature, this, kind of distinct personality, this, guy good at self-promoting, you gotta be on TV, or, if you're going to make money in Southern California, why not write for television? Even if,
Yes.
you wind up, again, kind of being in life and death struggles with TV producers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, I don't even think he was doing all that as a compromise. I think he actually did like TV. He just didn't want to
Oh
admit
yeah.
it.
Well,
Um,
he wrote, as we'll get to, a lot of articles about television.
yes. But actually, I'm going to give one other bit of video because I'd only watched it for the first time yesterday, and you may have already seen it. I'd sent it to you.
Yeah.
He plays himself in a late version of Scooby-Doo in an episode of Scooby-Doo. Have you watched this thing
Oh
yet?
yeah, I did watch it. Yeah.
I think actually the little speech that he gives, there's a scene where he's giving a talk at a school and the gang are watching him. That little segment, in some ways, which in any other circumstance, somebody else playing somebody called Harlan Ellison was giving that speech, you would think this was a send up of Harlan Ellison. You would think that it was a joke,
Right.
that it was an exaggeration. But he's playing himself, and it's like all of it is exactly he insults other authors, he insults the fans,
Hmm.
he self-aggrandizes. It's all like, but it's not
Oh,
even
he yells at
heightened.
the fans, which was
It's
something that he
yes,
did. Yeah.
it's not even heightened though. You know what I'm saying? It's
Right.
not even a
No, 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 no,
parody of
no.
himself. It
No.
is almost exactly the way he was, maybe even toned down a little bit because it's a cartoon, so there's no cursing. But I mean, that was pretty. I mean, am I wrong or you think I'm exaggerating
No, not at
about?
all. Not at all.
Yeah,
It is a very good encapsulation of him.
it's just. But yeah, those are the things that I would point to.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go a little over his biography and the
Sure.
different aspects of his life, his, kind of persona. We've alluded to a lot of it. Let's kind of make sure that we, kind of hit all the bases here. So Harley Ellison was a Jewish boy from Ohio. He said that early in his childhood he was beaten up quite a lot for being a
Yes.
small, smart-ass kid, and
Hmm.
also Jewish.
Yes.
He went to Ohio State University, where he got kicked out when he punched his creative writing professor. So we can see where things are going here,
Sure.
from here, what the trajectory is. He was in the army briefly. He was writing while he was in the army. He figured out how to do that, and would help some of his squad mates with things that they needed to have written, along with kind of
Well,
working on his
he
own.
would write letters for them to their girlfriends because they weren't
Yes,
able to do so.
right. So it's
Uh,
very Cyrano like.
yes, yes, yes. And I
Yeah.
point out the writing professor who Herlin felt wounded by in terms of his critiques. He then mailed him everything he got published from
Yes.
there on out, which was, as we've already mentioned, quite a lot.
Yes.
So I mean, this again, pugnacious and competitive, and everything is a competition for this man, or was.
Yes. Okay, so because his professor said you're not going to amount to much in
That's right. That's
this
right.
whole writing business. He was very left wing, very vocal about it through his
Yes.
entire life. He participated in marches that were organized by Dr. King.
Hmm.
He was a very consistent and loud advocate for the Equal Rights Amendment. He would show up on college campuses early in
Hmm.
his career and give talks. What kind of lefty would you say he was? So I said very left wing, and that could mean a lot of things. And you and I both have an interest in categorizing politics very finely. So what would you say his politics really were?
So I've been contemplating this question. I've noticed in the notes for several days. I don't and despite actually having given this thought, I don't have a really good answer.
Hmm.
I think that clearly he cared about uh, marginalized people in the society. So I think
Very
racism
much
bothered
so.
him. Um, I mean, he had certain misogynistic elements to his personality, but he clearly cared about the
Hmm.
ERA. I think that he didn't like people in power. So in that sense, I think he was lefty. And maybe you have a different view. I was thinking though, again, as a political scientist and who does think about these things, I don't see a lot of leftist behavior in his writing does not strike me as having a substantial political, at least what the stories that I read and that I remember. I can see anti-authoritarianism, but that's not necessarily left wing per se. I can see critiques of bureaucracy. I can see things about justice to a point, but not deeply elucidated, in my opinion. So I think it's hard for me to, and also the way he talks about, and this can go both ways. Part of how he talks about the writer getting paid
Hmm.
for his labor sounds a little Marxisty, but also the way he talks about getting paid sounds pretty capitalistic in other ways.
Oh, I think
So
he's much more
it's
capitalistic. It's more
yeah,
like just
yeah,
insist. So that we should just say like
yeah.
one of his constant refrains is, you alluded to it before about writing as a business. It's that
Hmm. Hmm.
never do anything for free.
That's right.
You know
That's right.
that a lot of writers are very willing to write treatments for TV shows or do other things on spec. He says, no, no, no. Always insist on getting paid. Always insist on
Yeah,
getting
yeah.
treated fairly in whatever the transaction is you're involved in.
Yeah, and I think that he was he was concerned about its material well-being, which is perfectly acceptable. I'm not critiquing that, but so how lefty
Yeah.
he is in some areas, though, is kind of hard to fully discern. I
Right.
think he had particular areas he was concerned about. There's the anecdote about him going to an event in Arizona and renting a trailer and staying in it because he did not want to spend any money in Arizona because they wouldn't make MLK Day a holiday. So he
Right.
brought his own food and lived in this trailer while he went to this convention. So he had certain areas of concern. But again, I don't. I mean, I know we're not really talking about his writing today, but it's impossible to talk about a writer and ignore his writing. Do you find his writing to be particularly political in any way? I mean, in a way that would fit this discussion of left right?
Yeah. Well, yes and no. That was a very academic answer, wasn't
Sure. It's more of a question than a comment than a question, really. Yeah.
it? So I would say this. I would say he was sort of a confrontationalist.
Yes.
I think what he had was a belief that injustices, indignities should be confronted always, all the time. You don't let things go by. You know,
Confrontation today, confrontation tomorrow,
exactly.
confrontation.
No,
Yeah.
I
That
think
no.
that was it. That was it. That there wasn't any compromising. There wasn't any. We'll fight it. We'll fight this battle. But maybe we don't have to fight every battle. I don't think that was his view of politics.
Yeah.
And so so that's kind of saying, well, what drives one to become political? What should one's attitude be once you become political? I would say that in being a confrontationalist, it was kind of his. My best guess would be that if he had any sort of theory of politics, it was use that confrontation to excite social change. So in that sense, some of his works, like Repent Harlequin said, The TikTok Man, which is a anti-authoritarian
Hmm.
comedic short story, or The Whimper Whip Dogs, which is about a lot of the sort of depraved cruelty in modern society
Hmm.
that goes uncommented on, was supposed to somehow result in change. Yeah, without the confrontation, change wouldn't happen. But I don't think he had like a an ideology that gave you a program for change. It,
Right. I
and
mean,
in that sense, that like the purpose of writing is to confront, get people to feel uncomfortable, and then something happens, presumably.
I can see that. I guess I would go either both a step further, but maybe even less sophisticated than you may be suggesting. I mean, he was just a confrontational person, period, right?
Right.
So I sometimes feel like everything was a confrontation, and the degree to which he thought that was going to lead to change, I don't know. I do think that just there isn't there. I don't find in his work or even in the things he talks about a coherent political philosophy beyond having clear views on certain subjects. Do you see what you know what I mean? I mean, I think
Right.
he
Yeah.
clearly believed that racial discrimination was wrong. How much of that was being the short Jew that got beat up in Ohio, I don't know. But I think he clearly didn't like, which is ironic because he was a bully, but he didn't like bullies. I think there was like that whole thing.
Hmm.
But I struggle to discern again. I struggle to determine what kind of lefty he was beyond what we've
Yeah.
described.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a coherence there. I don't.
But I think that's true of a lot of writers too.
Oh, totally.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's true of
sure.
all of us to to some extent
Yeah,
that we don't necessarily have very worked out political programs. But I think,
yeah,
yeah,
that's fair.
but I think like if you look at him, and maybe like put him side by side with Kurt Vonnegut, there might be some similarity in their politics or kind of what they
Sure.
saw as their purpose in life. Um,
He's no Robert Heinlein or Bobby, as I like to call him.
yeah, Bobby. Hey, Bobby. It's why do I lapse into Dallas when I hear the name Bobby? Bobby, you see, I watched.
It was all a dream, Tom.
It was all a dream. Okay, so his early writing. So he started out, as many authors did, basically writing whatever assignments he could get. And so he
Right.
would, he didn't just get the chance to write science fiction, but he also would write, like novels about like troubled teens with switchblades, sort of pulp thrillers.
Right.
Um, which he was, very much a magazine writer, wrote short stories. He really was a short story writer throughout his career, and he always wrote with a typewriter,
Yes.
including later in life when he could
Yes.
have had a word processor. And in the documentary you mentioned, he shows off his cabinet full of spare
He had
typewriters,
backup typewriters and
backup
keep
typewriters.
keeping the ribbons in the refrigerator because he couldn't get new ones. Yeah.
Right. He also then got involved in writing television.
Yes.
As I, mentioned, he would write shows. He would write scripts for TV shows, and often he would very much disagree with the kind of changes that the producers wanted to make. So
You can't move that comma.
that's Oxford comma or death. Those are your two options. So, like for example, there's a Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea episode that he had
Hmm.
his name taken off. He put his pseudonym on there, Cordwainer Bird, which he often used when he didn't want
Yes.
to be recognized for it, but he still wanted to be paid.
Well,
Um,
yeah, I think he wanted to be recognized as giving them the birds, what he wanted to be
oh, there you
recognized
go.
for.
There you
Yeah,
go.
no, I think that's exactly.
Yeah.
I'm not even being funny. Uh,
Yeah. So Route 66, Burke's Law, a lot of TV shows of
Including an
like the
episode of The
early,
Flying Nun.
The Flying Nun, which I did
That's
not
my.
see that. I watched the Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea episode, but I should have seen The Flying Nun. Maybe I'll see it before
We'll
we do
talk
our third
TV more.
episode.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Also did, episodes of science fiction shows like Star Trek you
Hmm.
mentioned.
Hmm.
He did two episodes of The Outer Limits.
Yes.
Yeah, which that was always a personal favorite of mine, that
Hmm.
show in general. And we'll talk about the two episodes that he did in the later episode.
Yes,
He also was involved in kind of launching a new TV show, The Star Lost, which was a Canadian produced show starring Keir Dullea of
that's
2001.
right. That's right.
And that was about a multi-generation starship that, as all multi-generation starships do, had some sort of catastrophic accident. People living on there don't know that they're living inside a spaceship.
You can never trust the salesman at the multi-generational starship lot.
I know. What a bunch of hucksters. Not that, that selling you a multi-generation ship is something you shouldn't be skeptical about in the first place. But anyway, be that as it
Especially
may.
if you're a bunch of middle managers and telephone sanitizers.
There you go. Anyway, so that show jumped the rails and he took his name off that. Um, he eventually kind of, became a grand old man of science fiction. But on the path of doing there, he had this incredibly important period of writing that we'll cover next time between
Yeah,
basically the 1960s up through like the early 1990s when he
yeah,
wrote really his signature fiction.
agree. Also, you left out he wrote the screenplay for a movie called The Oscar in 1966 that apparently
Right.
is quite terrible that I have not seen. Have you seen it?
I have not seen it.
Yeah,
Maybe we should do an MST3K like watch of it. I did see some clips from it, which were pretty awful.
yeah.
But that doesn't count as the same as watching the whole gory, gruesome experience. Do you think there was anything about him that made him especially well suited for television or not well suited for television?
Yeah, I think, and I expect we'll come back to this in subsequent episodes, but I think that the way he writes short stories was well suited to things, especially like The Outer Limits or The Twilight Zone, as he wrote for the revival in the 90s or 80s, whenever it was. I think that I think his way of writing in general is better suited to a very limited story,
Yes.
and therefore TV works for him in that regard, especially
Yeah.
anthology type things.
Yeah. I'm not surprised that he never became a novelist because of that. Uh, anyway.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Uh,
I was thinking about the real estate novelist and Billy Joel's. Anyway, never mind.
oh, okay. Oh, that's right. Yeah.
He never had time for a wife. Anyway,
That's right.
go ahead.
So yes, all right. So Harlan Ellison is, referencing right and left people like Andre Gide and
And I'm
Guy de
referencing Billy Joel.
Maupassant, and
Sure.
we're referencing Billy Joel.
So now you've challenged me. I have to be more intellectual.
Ah, gosh, I need to be more
I'll,
intellectual too.
I'll work on it.
During this time, he also championed doing a different sort of short story anthology with other
Hmm.
writers,
Yes.
rather than having existing works that were published originally in a magazine repackaged for an anthology paperback. He then went out and commissioned people to write stories, new stories, and encouraged them to be daring. This was the Dangerous Visions anthology that we
Hmm.
mentioned before. And, I've been reading through Dangerous Visions again, and I would agree. I mean, a lot of these writers are clearly stretching themselves
Hmm.
a bit, including a couple of like very dark pieces by people I never really perceived as being particularly mordant writers. It's just they
Hmm.
really kind of reached down and found something truly depressing to talk about. Um, he was, as we said, a big figure in the Los Angeles science fiction scene. We talked about Hour 25. Um, that was really an important hub for science fiction fans, and I
Yes.
can't really emphasize that enough. And the host of it, Mike Hodel, a really sweet guy. I really liked him. Anyway, he passed away, and then Ellison went from
At a
being a
very young
regular
age, at
at a very young
47.
age. Yeah, he went from being a regular guest to then being host for a year. Did you listen to him when
So
he
I
was the
don't
host?
think I ever, I was looking at this last night trying to figure out my timeline. So, I discovered Hour 25 when we moved to California, 83-ish. But by the time Hodel died in May of 86,
Hmm.
and by that point in time, Not only did I have a steady girlfriend, but I also worked at McDonald's. And somewhere in there, I was having to get up and open the store on a Saturday morning. So I was not staying up till midnight to listen to Hour 25 at that point.
Right.
Either I was on a date or I was in bed. So I don't think, I don't, I feel like I became aware because they renamed it Mike Hodel's Hour 25, but I just didn't have the time at that point to listen to the radio at that moment in time. And again, if it'd been like, as we mentioned in the episode about radio shows, if I could have recorded on a radio TiVo back in the day and
Hmm.
then listened to it in my car later, I would have, but I
Yes.
just didn't.
Yeah,
So it
I
just
didn't
kind of
catch.
faded out of my mind.
Yeah, I didn't catch because for life reasons, I didn't catch him being host either.
Yeah.
You know.
Although I was shocked to read, and I know this will shock you, that he ended up having a dispute with KPFK, and that's why he quit doing the show.
It's
The
only a
world,
matter of time.
the world could just not live up to Harlan Ellison. That's, I think, the theme of his entire career.
Well, the thing is, like, he would have these dust ups with people, and he would occasionally mend fences with them.
Yes.
And, like sometimes, like a particular writer would say something in print that he didn't like, and he'd denounce them,
Yes.
or in one case, famously take a swing at them. But he could mend fences, and they seem to have decent relationships afterwards.
Or sometimes he could take out the thermonuclear devices and just blow them up
Yeah.
because, like, he tried, and we'll talk about this in grand detail in a couple episodes from now. But I mean, he kind of pretended like he got along with Roddenberry for a while, even in print, and
Yes.
then eventually decided that he'd had enough of that. And
Right.
holy cow! Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah,
Anyway, yeah, and again, this is where it's difficult to separate the person from the work. We keep saying, well, in a later episode, well, in the next episode, but
sure.
it's
It's
kind of the
just
name of the game here.
the name of the
Uh,
game is Ancient Geeks, Tom. Don't forget.
that's right. Fame is the
Keep.
name of the game.
Oh yeah, that's
He was involved in in writing a name of the game episode too. By the way, that wasn't purely random. So he was as a fixture in the LA science fiction scene. He also had a relationship with local booksellers, particularly, really interestingly, with a bookstore called A Change of Hobbit,
mhm.
owned by a woman named Sherry Gottlieb.
Yes.
And I think it was a couple of times, at least once, I think it was a couple of times, he did sort of a benefit for the bookstore where he would
Mhm.
sit in the front window
Right.
and he would write short stories for like a week, like a story a day. And I remember seeing him doing this,
Well,
which of course did generate a lot of sales for
of
the
course,
store,
of
and
course.
that good for him to trying to help out bookstores because you're never going to make a mint off being a bookseller. And I also remember, and I've lost them over the years, but I had a couple of Xerox manuscripts that they either sold or gave out if you were
Hmm.
there
Okay.
of these stories. So like I think it was A through Z in the Chocolate Alphabet. I had a
Okay.
copy of that.
I mean, did they Change of Hobbit and Gottlieb got mentioned a lot on Hour 25. I never
Yeah,
actually went to the store, but
yeah,
because probably when I first heard about it, I didn't have a driver's license.
yeah. Well,
So
we had a
LA
store in Orange
Mun.
County, so like
Yeah,
why would we go to
that's
another
right.
store in Los Angeles? Uh, his home was also a fixture
Yes.
in science fiction. It was, the nickname for it was Ellison Wonderland
Hmm.
or the Lost Aztec Temple of Mars.
Yes.
It was quite a place.
Yes.
Had interesting external friezes,
Hmm.
but inside it was just jammed with all the paraphernalia of a life of writing,
Hmm.
books and books and books, quotes
Hmm.
here and there in strategic places and so forth. His typewriters in a closet.
Gigas and
Yeah, movie posters. He was a big movie buff.
yeah,
Anyway, it was quite the place. I actually
comic books.
went there once. It was because my family was doing interviews with science fiction writers and then selling them as cassettes.
Hmm.
And we were going to do one with Michael Moorcock. And anyway, so we went there, and it was overwhelming. This place,
I
it was
can
quite
imagine.
incredible. It's like the other place like it was the Acker Mansion, Forrest J. Ackerman's house,
Mm.
which was also jam packed with all sorts of gewgaws and relics from science fiction, fantasy, and horror
Just
movies.
all of this reminds me is I just need to find a cool name for my house because I don't have a cool name for my house. The
Oh,
Acker Mansion or Alice in Wonderland. I don't know.
yeah, that's true. I don't
But
either. I
no,
don't even have one
anyone
for
who
my car. I used to have a name for my car, but I don't have one anymore.
if you anyone who wants, I mean, you can Google Lost Aztec Temple of Mars or just Harlan Ellison's home. You can
Yeah,
find photographs
yeah. Please do.
online. It's
It's
worth
something.
it's worth seeing. Yeah.
Yeah. He was at lots of local conventions, as we mentioned. He was a regular there. Did you ever see him in person?
No, I never did.
Okay. Yeah, I
Just
got the sense that you didn't, but
no.
yeah,
Hour 25 was as close as I got.
yeah. And he was there doing book signings at
Hmm.
bookstores or at conventions and so forth, as authors are wont to do. And there was even like this sort of half serious Harlan for President campaign.
Hmm.
That I remember there was a bumper sticker that we had. Uh, you know, again, this is like back in 1980, I think it was when it was the Harlan for President. It could have been 76. I don't remember. All right. He was also, as we said, kind of this important figure in the science fiction community. And he had confrontational relationships with some writers. He was also
Yes.
very good friends with a lot of writers.
Yes.
He mentored writers like in that documentary, Dan
Hmm.
Simmons, the author of the Hyperion series
Hmm.
and The Terror and other books you may have heard of, talks, very, very gratefully of the kind of help that he got from Harlan Ellison. Um, something that often gets overlooked. He also co-wrote a set of
Yes.
short stories with different authors that appeared in an anthology, Partners in Wonder, which I've got a copy here I'm holding. So people like Robert Silverberg, Robert Bloch, Samuel R. Delany, Theodore Sturgeon, Keith Lomer, Roger Zelazny. Anyway, so
I
he
have it
was.
too, just because I'm tired of you lowering your books over me. So
Oh,
I
okay.
have you have an older version. I have
I
a
have an older version.
yeah.
Is it a first printing? I don't know.
I don't know.
Let's see. No, it's not. It's a repeat. Sorry, a reprint. Anyway, so he was connected to everybody, talked to everybody, you know, with some exceptions. Like occasionally he would, as we said, kind of get into some sort of imbroglio with another writer. We mentioned Joanna Russ,
Hmm.
who's like she starts this review of his short story or novella, I should say, A Boy and His Dog, adapted into film form.
Hmm.
She starts the review basically saying, "I'm a friend of Harlan's, but this movie and the sentiments behind it are abominable."
Hmm.
So he wasn't just a person who kind of threw barbs and invectives at other people. I mean, he was also a target of criticism by others, and
Oh yes.
yeah, including because of the last Dangerous Visions fiasco.
Oh yes.
There was not a terrible amount of kind of public complaints about him on that, but he tried to kind of there was a sequel to Dangerous Visions, again Dangerous Visions. There was going to be a third one. uh, it seemed to kind of keep slipping further and further into the
Into the
mists of
future.
the future and never get published. And it wasn't published during his lifetime, and that I know caused some hard feelings. And one science fiction writer actually wrote a long essay, kind of saying that he felt that Ellison was being deceitful about the real
Yes.
status of the
Yes.
collection. We mentioned about how he was interested in the business of writing. Don't ever do anything for free. And he said that both of people who were, writing fiction for print as well as television.
Well, I guess as of right now, the podcast is canceled.
Oh, okay, because we're doing it for free.
Yes.
But who would pay you? Me?
Well, therein
Then you'd
lies the
have to pay
problem.
me.
Therein lies the problem.
Therein lies the problem. Um, One thing you
Says a
said
guy who
that,
writes for free every day. Yeah, I know. I'm
yeah, I
sorry. Go
know.
ahead.
That's all we do for
I know.
free and for love.
That's
Because
right.
that's the secret ingredient of our writing is
Sure it
love.
is. It's love. All we need is love. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So beyond the kind of the confines of Southern California, he was also, a presence in the science fiction community, not just among science fiction writers. You said something to me which was really interesting before
Okay.
we recorded
It
this, which
happens
was
on occasion.
it happens on occasion, and I mark it on my calendar, and it becomes a holiday,
There we go.
a yearly holiday. And that was that he had his own distinct fandom.
Yeah, he did.
So what
I
made you
mean,
say that?
well, I mean, I think it kind of relates back to what I was saying, I think, to 15-year-old me or whatever it was. I mean, there was this notion with Ellison that he was this sort of a next level kind of science fiction writer. In fact, so special that he
Right.
would call himself a science fiction writer. But clearly, for someone who would get views on Tom Schneider or get ears on
Hmm.
Hour 25 or people to show up to listen to him give talks or watch him, even watch him write short stories in a window at a bookstore, he clearly had a following, right? I mean, you can't, he published a lot of books, even if he's not in print now. And he was quite popular for a while. And I think that, and of course, this leads to a whole conversation about his relationship with fandom in general. I mean, he was a personality beyond just being an author. I mean, to take a slight digression to add to something you were saying a minute ago, not only was he sort of a celebrity within the science fiction community and had lots of author friends, but I mean, one of the things
Hmm.
that struck me in watching the documentary, Robin Williams is in it. He was friends with Robin Williams for crying out loud. That's not
Yes.
a normal thing for a human being to have been friends with Robin Williams. And you know, and also, which is now regrettable in hindsight, Neil Gaiman was a big friend of his. But you know, Joe Michael Straczynski, who did Babylon 5,
Hmm.
was a friend of his, also was involved in Hour 25 at one point, which I didn't realize. I knew that, but I reminded of it the other day. Or, you know, Ron Moore from Battlestar Galactica and all this. There's all of these he had a cloud of support and friends, and he was famous, right? In a way that most authors are not. But he also like had this antagonistic relationship with fans. He would berate fans as a general
Yes.
notion. He didn't like science fiction fans. He hated Trekkies. At least he said that he did. He would really kind of rail against all this stuff and about mindlessness and about being in a cult almost. And I can't remember if he used that phrase or not, but I think he probably did. And this may be leading into an essay that he wrote that you might want to talk
Hmm.
about here in a moment.
Oh yeah.
Um, it is, I think the thing that, especially in my dotage here, as I think about all this stuff, I mean, two things come to mind actually, or two or three things. One is just an observation, which is, okay, I understand why the fans annoyed him, especially some of them, because they could be quite intrusive.
Hmm.
But it also like you can't exist without your fans. So it's kind of a weird relationship. But in some ways, I don't think he fully acknowledged that fact, right? I mean, I
Right.
don't know. I don't have any idea for sure. But since he didn't do anything for free, he's getting paid for those convention
Hmm.
appearances. In fact, I know from things I've heard, and it's a different level, but not radically different. You know, even minor people who are on Star Trek or on sci-fi shows can make a lot of money on the convention circuit. You can your entire you can have your entire annual income built around this if you were so
Yes.
inclined. So he's making some money off. He lived pretty well, relatively speaking, right? I mean, again, I don't know when he bought that house. Had to have bought it quite a long time ago, but he has a view of downtown Los Angeles from his house, which he
Yeah, it's a
shows in
nice
the
house.
movie. It's a nice house. It's probably worth quite a bit of money at this point. So I mean, but the other thoughts that I had about this, and this may help lead into this conversation about this essay. On the one hand, look, I get it. Um, the best I can do, because I don't have fans, but I have written online for 20 something years now. And yes, just even on the small exposure that I have to commenters on blogs is occasionally very frustrating to deal with certain people.
Hmm.
And the handful of newspaper columns, I for a while I was writing semi-regularly for the Mobile Press Register, and I would occasionally get these people get mad. You say things sometimes, and they're mad about. something you didn't say. You can get some pretty rude emails from people just because you dared to share your ideas in public. And then I also understand sort of the predilection to want to make fun of crazy fans because, I had students. I had students that did really crazy things sometimes. And people sometimes now will share stories about students on social media, and then there's some backlash. Maybe you shouldn't make fun of students, and I think there's some truth to that. But I mean, it's like I always like to tell the story. I mean, my wife likes to tell it more than I do. But when I was first teaching, I was my first couple years as an assistant professor, and on of all days, Christmas Day, a student decided to send me an email telling me what an ass I was. It's like, this was the day you decided that you had
Mhm.
to like take me down. But so you get things like this
It
that
was a
happen.
gift.
It was a gift.
It
That's
was a
right.
gift. He felt
Well,
that you needed to hear this in the spirit of giving
that's right.
some
That's
constructive
right.
criticism.
Sure. So I get that to a degree. Did I address what you thought I was going to say?
No, you did. You did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so at the time, and this is still true today, but at the time, there were people who were, let's say, more fans of one writer than
Sure.
others.
Yeah.
You'd run into them at conventions. There'd be little, packs of them and so forth.
Right.
And I think to some extent, Ellison was a sort of a cross faction sort of appealing figure. But I
Hmm.
think there were people who were really deeply into
Oh,
him.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, sure.
yeah. And
I
often he would not be nice to them. And
Right.
I was witness to that a couple of times. And it made me wonder, like, if you're getting abused by the person whom you revere
Right.
unfairly, just because you come up and you're stammering and you ask a
Right.
question and it's
Yes.
not a particularly well phrased one, or maybe it's even a stupid question, but just to be pilloried at that moment, it's like,
Hmm.
hmm, does that cause you to kind of maybe question a lot of your fandom at that particular moment about what you like
Yes.
about that person?
Well, here's a thought that I just had. So comedians will often, like Conan O'Brien might say, talking to Marty Short about how great it was to get roasted by Don Rickles. So in some
Hmm.
ways, I think maybe the perception of some of these fans with Harlan was just doing the Harlan act on them. Now I've decided over
Yeah.
time that it wasn't an act; that he really did hold them in contempt. Um, so I mean, but that may be part of but somehow people would deal with that. It's like, oh, it's just I'm being roasted by Harlan. Harlan's just being Harlan. But
Well, I'll give a specific example. So
yeah.
he was giving a talk, and at some point, somebody said something that was not terribly reverential of the author
Hmm.
Fritz Leiber,
Right.
and kind of Ellison shot back with something like, well, not only do you not have an inkling of understanding about the greatness of Fritz Leiber, you, sir, are not worthy of carrying his pencil case.
Right. Right. No,
Really,
it's
Ben?
no, I agree. But this is kind of what I was getting at. I mean,
Hmm.
I think he got away with some of this stuff because either other people felt like they were in on the joke at the expense of the other fan, or the fan may have thought it was just shtick.
Hmm.
But when you read a lot of his essays, not even the one, the Ethnogenesis one that we'll talk about more in a second, we read specifically for this discussion, xenogenesis, however you'd say that. Anyway,
Yeah.
the but things that in other essays that I read, in things other people wrote about him, but also things that he would say on like Schneider or on other
Yeah.
interviews. Even in his own documentary, he really comes across as contemptuous of other people in many ways,
Hmm.
including people that would consider themselves fans. And while again, I understand and agree that people can be very difficult. They can be rude. They can be demanding. They can be all kinds of problems. And I can understand to some degree the difficulty of celebrity, right? But I don't think that's the main thing with Harlan. I think we've mentioned confrontation many times, but he just really, and I called him a bully at one point. I think he was a bully with his fans in many ways. That
Yeah.
it was dominance, and it was unnecessary in many ways, to be honest. But the man seemed to have a need to be in conflict constantly, including with people who otherwise were just wanting to like be around him or tell them that they liked him and his work.
Yes.
And there's no need to be rude about that, right? I don't think.
Yeah.
But he was.
Yeah. And the essay we're referring to called Xenogenesis was originally given as a keynote talk at a science fiction convention. And it is really a chronicle of bad fan behavior.
Yes. Yes.
And I was there when he gave the talk, and it did, he really did cause the room to go very quiet. When he talked about up to and including somebody throwing a cup full of vomit in the
No,
face of
that's the
one of
awful.
the
Yeah.
gentler writers. But it's like in every community they're going to be nuts,
Yes,
and
there are.
and maybe you can say that there are, something about science fiction attracts a certain kind of nut, but it was a very harsh criticism. And I have to say at the time I felt uh, somewhat justified because being a bookseller, we had some of the nuts as our regular
Sure.
customers.
Sure.
What he was trying to say was like there used to be a phrase in science fiction fandom like slan. It was based on a A.E. Van Vogt story about a mutant with psychic powers. And like people would say, well, by being in science fiction fandom, we were better than other people. So mentioned like
Right. Right. Right.
writers saying that they're better than other people. That science fiction fans were better than other people, and that was something that he wanted to kind of tear the living heart out of when
hmm
he gave that talk. So it was harsh. I wouldn't say it was totally undeserved though.
No, here's the thing though, right? And I don't, I'm not arguing with any of what you just said. I think that the irony is what you just described, the idea
Hmm.
of being better than others.
Yes.
This is the way Ellis looked at himself, the way he looked at his work. It's the way he looked at even the way he interacted with the fans. I think it's totally fair to point out that there are, difficult people. And maybe the purpose of the speech, I think, as he describes it in the essay, is to maybe dissuade people or to think twice about some of this behavior. And I think some of it, I'm sure someone's going to throw vomit at somebody. There's probably something mentally wrong with you that no speech is going to deal with. Maybe
Oh,
the part
exactly.
about, I mean,
Exactly.
again, showing up someone's house at 5 o'clock in the morning and asking them to sign your books. Maybe you can dissuade that, like, oh, you mean it's not a good idea? No, it's not a good
Or
idea.
outing somebody who has made the decision to write under a pseudonym. I mean,
Yes, yes,
that was pretty awful. And
yeah,
that's less the kind of craziness of throwing vomit in somebody's
right,
face.
right.
That's that's sort of like being a pack of hyenas.
Yes,
You
yes,
know?
yes. So I guess, yeah, I mean, clearly fandom is complicated. Um, I guess I'm reacting and I wasn't. So did you see the speech? Because I thought it was first given in Portland. Maybe I misread that, or maybe he gave it multiple places. What did you see him give the speech? I assume
You
in
know,
Los
I
Angeles.
well, since we traveled for around kind of
Okay,
the Western United
the
States to
circuit. Okay,
go to conventions, I know I was there. If it were at Portland, I don't remember it being Portland,
okay,
but we were there, so it had to be Portland.
yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
You weren't in a Portland state of mind, huh?
I wasn't.
Um, what do you think about his general attitude toward fandom?
I think he was too hard on fans
Hmm.
from what I saw in person.
Right,
You don't get a chance to apologize to somebody you just run into in the hallway
right,
at a hotel.
right.
That's not the venue for creating a lasting relationship that you can then try to correct later in life when you realize you've been a jerk. So yeah, I think he was too hard. I think he was right in pointing out some
Yeah, I think that's
problematic
fair.
aspects of fandom, but I think that I wouldn't have handled it the way he did.
Yeah, and that's fair.
Yeah. Um, I think in general he felt more kinship with other writers than the fans,
Yes.
despite any sort of confrontations he had with the writers. He seemed to have, again, ability to mend fences and uh, just in anyway.
I think that he saw himself as the artist with a capital A,
Hmm.
and that he deserved, therefore, to be admired for his art,
Yes.
and therefore he deserved readers, and that fans were a necessary evil. But I don't think he was fully honest with himself about how much his livelihood was actually because he had those fans.
Well, I think it's fair to say that here's this incredibly accomplished man.
Yes.
Right? You look at just the list of awards. Uh, so in that sense, respecting whatever it is that are a person's accomplishments, that's a good thing. But I don't think that lashing out at people for
No,
saying something
it's
stupid is
no.
it's not a privilege that those accomplishments should grant
That's right.
you.
That's right.
Um, all right, so let's wrap up a little bit. What would you say is your final word on Ellison the person?
I think that again, this sort of foray into, whether it's the TV appearances on Schneider, whether it's the documentary, which was, I thought, a little,
Cloying?
yeah, that's a good word for it. I would say that the documentation of the way in which he did treat people, of course, we haven't mentioned the time that he grabbed Connie Willis's breast on screen, on stage, excuse me, during a, oh, was
Hmm.
it Hugo or the Nebulas? I always forget which one it was. Which was gross, and other accusations of bad behavior that I don't know have ever been corroborated, but are nonetheless out there in the ether. I mean, I think he was a bully. I think he was, for all of his success, I think in many ways insecure and therefore had to put this persona on. And we also have not mentioned there have been some suggestions that he was diagnosed with some mental illness issues with bipolar disorder. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And you could sort of see that. I find him to be too self-important in a way that I find off-putting. It's kind of like, I don't know, the very beginning of again, we haven't really talked about the documentary. It starts, and I'll censor this as well. I
We
think we're
haven't even
trying to
said the
keep
name of it.
I mentioned it earlier, but it's called Dreams with Sharp Teeth.
Yeah.
You can rent it on an Amazon Prime. I've seen it twice actually. I saw it when it was
Hmm.
on for, it was used to be free, but I rewatched it for this discussion. But at the very beginning, he says something about just shoot the effing thing so I can get on with my life. And I find that was to me telling in the sense of you're having a movie made about you, and you know you're having a movie made about you. So it seems almost like false frustration. Because, like, the other thing that I gathered from the movie is he was, in some ways, a frustrated performer. He was very good, by the way, at reading his own work. So, well, I'll talk more about it later, but I remember hearing him read stories in Hour 25. He clearly enjoyed being on, again, for all of his griping about TV, he liked to be on TV. He liked being interviewed by Tom Schneider. He liked sharing
Hmm.
his opinions. I'm sure he liked giving these speeches at the conventions. He liked all of that, right? And that's fine. It's just that he then acted like he kind of didn't. And I think, again, I hate to quote Neil Gaiman, but he was correct when he said that in some ways, Harlan is a performance artist, and I think there's some truth to that, or he
Yes. And
was.
and that's why we're doing this whole episode
Yeah,
on
yeah,
his
yeah.
persona. Exactly.
So
So I would say this about him.
go ahead.
I think as we've already said in the course of this episode, he was a pivotal figure in science fiction and fantasy.
Hmm.
And he is no doubt deserving of the lauds for a lot of the work that he did. I mean, Dangerous Visions is an important anthology.
Sure.
I think his own account of it in the introduction goes way over the
Oh
top.
no, it's a good illustration of what I'm talking about. His
Yeah,
self-importance just shines through in that introduction.
yeah, like he's the vanguard of the revolution,
Yes,
and
yes,
it's way too much.
yes.
I'm so glad that he did it and changed some of the ways in which kind of again science fiction and fantasy are at least in the day, were more of a short story format and I kind of genre, and I still think that's often true today. Some of the ideas behind science fiction fantasy shine best in a short format. Um, so hats off to him for doing that. So I want to grant that a lot of the stories we'll talk about next time I really like. And going back to having not read them for a long time, I enjoyed the reread. I appreciate what he did in order to try to elevate people's sense of what this genre should be about. Again, not just him. I mean, that was a lot of the new wave and
Right.
science fiction, Moorcock and Aldous and other people. But um, and I also had in my notes for a guy who hated television, he was sure wrapped up in it. But
Yes. Yes.
good for him to try to advance television. I don't mean I don't think that he was necessarily successful at it always.
Yes.
I think he was appreciated for his efforts within the science fiction community. Outside of it, and I don't think people say, "Wow, the guy who wrote City on the Edge of Forever, he must be a terrific fella." Uh, um, but
So-
there's things now I look back on, and I soured on Ellison a bit when I was
yeah.
younger,
Yes.
and here's why. So he was a great storyteller about himself,
Right.
and he liked to recount a lot of the incidents where he was wronged by an editor or a TV
Yes.
producer or
Yes.
whomever, and he struck back. And one of them he describes that he first was wronged by somebody and by an editor who promised him that his books wouldn't have inserts that were cigarette ads.
Right.
And then his books appeared with that, and then the guy said, "Well, what are you going to do?" and blew him off. And so, by his own account, and he's not a terribly reliable narrator,
No.
by his own account, he first mailed the person a large load of bricks,
Yes.
and then later on, he mailed that person a dead gopher.
Yes.
And he tells this, in an amusing
Yes.
fashion, but he also is aware that the guy has heart problems and winds
Right.
up in the hospital at the end
Right.
of all of this. And if you listen to this anecdote on YouTube, you can kind of say, well, here's a guy who's just spinning a yarn, right?
Hmm.
Maybe he did some of these things. He's probably exaggerating some elements of it. So I look on this anecdote differently now than I did when I was younger.
Yes.
I'm struck now by a lot of the mean spiritedness of it, and
Yes.
and why would you exaggerate to make it seem even more improbably mean spirited? When I was younger, I thought it was funny. Now, not so much, and I realize that's again kind of using Ellison as a little bit of a barometer of my own change over time, which you're supposed
Hmm.
to do as an adult. Um, I'm listening to this clip on YouTube of him giving this anecdote to an audience of people who are lapping it up at a convention, and they're
Yes.
braying like jackasses in the background. And it's like, okay, that was probably me at a younger age, but I'm glad I got over that, And I think there is a seductive lure to people who are perpetually combative,
Hmm.
supremely confident,
Yes.
pugnacious in the name of their proclaimed causes. That's a little dangerous, and one
Yes.
should and one should question ourselves about when we kind of fall under the spell of people like that. I think in the case of Ellison, as I said, I laid out a lot of great accomplishments, a lot of things I'm personally grateful he did for the genre that I dearly love. But there's a lot of it that's very kind of unsettling about the persona, but not just
Right.
about him. You could again kind of blow him off and say, well, here's somebody I can dismiss as just a guy who liked to tell a good story and exaggerated the hell out of things and so forth. But also, what's disturbing isn't just about him, who could just dismiss if he were a less important person, but just all the people who are so wrapped up in the persona.
Yeah, I mean, I think to the point earlier about his fandom and also about again the age thing that you note, I think that the Gopher story, which I don't know when I first heard the Gopher story. I don't think I heard it when I was younger, but I can
Mhm.
see how a 15, 18 to 21-year-old whatever fan would find this to be, oh, he's rebellious, he's especially he's a sort of above this mediocrity, especially given the
Mhm.
way in which Harlan self-mythologized, right? That he was always fighting for, you know, as he said on Tom Schneider, I hate mediocrity, right? He thinks that, and
Yeah.
he always proclaimed that the reason he behaved the way he did was because he was fighting for quality and for art.
Mhm.
And I think, at this point in my life, I look at it and I'm like, in some ways, no, you're just being a jerk, right? I had written down, I couldn't find the note, but I found the quote that I wanted. I'd written down at some point that he was a gadfly. And then I found, I was just reading Wikipedia of all things, but Ellison wrote a description of himself for an essay, a nonfiction book that Stephen King wrote called The Danse Macabre. And it says, he said, gadfly is what they call you when you're no longer dangerous. And that word dangerous, he likes that word
Mhm.
dangerous. Like,
Dangerous
I'm not
visions.
sure, yes, but I mean, like, he said, I much prefer troublemaker, malcontent, and desperado. I see myself as a combination of Zorro and Jiminy Cricket. My stories go out there from here and raise hell. I think, again, I guess you've got to, as a writer in general, whether one at his level or at some other level, I know that at some point you have to assume that somebody somewhere should be reading this or reading it of some use to somebody else. But boy, he really had a high opinion of himself. I think that he projected this idea of being dangerous.
Mhm.
Um, and certainly mailing a dead gopher to someone's office and then having to have the place fumigated is dangerous as a certain kind of way. It may in fact be criminal.
Or getting into a
Um,
confrontation with somebody in an office and a model of a submarine falls
yeah,
off the wall
swinging,
and
taking a
breaks
swing at
breaks the
somebody. Yeah,
guy's hip
yeah.
or
Yeah,
femur or
this is
something.
this is
Yeah.
not admirable
Mhm.
behavior. This is psychotic behavior. And I think though that he did project this notion that he was dangerous in a way in defense of art. I think that the irony is, and I think we'll talk more about this. I'm going to save some of it again for the TV discussion. If the man had learned how to work with others a little bit better, he probably would have been even more successful. And his stuff probably wouldn't be out of print at this point. I think
Mhm.
that he burned brightly. I think he made contributions. Um, but it is sort of striking that he's not talked about now. And I think part of it's
Yeah.
from his own persona, I think that, but anyway, yeah. I mean, I think I'll say this and we can move on from this particular part of it. I mean, it is, I don't know what the right word is. 'Cause amusing is not the word that I want, but there is in more than one location where you probably are going to get the gopher story recounted. You also get well, you know, I didn't shove someone down an elevator shaft because this is persistent rumor or story that he
Right.
shoved a fan down. I mean, it like, as he points out, if he'd done that, he'd be in prison. But it's it's just sort of telling that that's a story that's told about him potentially as something that happened, and that he like
Right.
laughs about it, and then we think about the gopher story or whatever else is going on. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. And my last thought about him is I think that the idea that authors, by virtue of being writers, have a special insight into the human condition or
right.
the life, the universe, and everything. I don't think that he necessarily promulgated that in the way that other people have in an obnoxious way, but there's a tinge of it certainly. You know, the writer as truth teller, the writer
Yes.
as
No, 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 no.
moralist, uh, rather than the writer being somebody who may have very admirable qualities, but I just remember being struck by meeting people like Roger Zelazny who said, "Yeah, it's a job."
That's right. Now, Zelazny,
Yeah,
which I did see
yeah.
live at a small convention, so but yeah,
Hmm.
he had a much more humble mien, shall we say.
Yeah.
No, I mean, and I sent it to you, but it's a two quotes. One, it's not quite the same thing, but I did write it down from Dreams of Sharp Teeth. There's a quote that comes on the screen from Mario Vargas Llosa, which says,
Mhm.
"Writers are exorcists of their own demons." So I think this is part of the mythology of Ellison that he's like
Right.
so deeply thoughtful that he has to like proclaim this truth. But from the one of the first pages of Stalking the Nightmare, right, is a William Faulkner quote, which I really think,
Hmm.
I don't know if Ellison picked this out for this, who knows? An editor may have done it, but it does encapsulate the way I think he thinks. So I don't have much patience with the facts, and any writer is a congenital liar to begin with, or he wouldn't take up writing. I write to say no to death. An artist is a creature driven by demons. He usually don't usually know why they chose him, and he's usually too busy to wonder why. I mean, I think Ellison thought of himself as some kind of oracle in a way that,
Hmm.
again, anybody that writes and assumes anybody else is going to read what they write clearly thinks somewhat highly of themselves
Right.
by definition. I admit this. I am no writer of this type, but I'm a published author. I've written stuff that I think is important that other people should read and should think about. Um, but I don't think of myself as sort of the voice of the gods. And in some ways, Ellison, I think, ironically, I find it, I don't know, I find it interesting when writers, especially fiction writers, um, claim a certain deep truth that I would actually rather reserve for nonfiction writers who are really trying to like grapple with reality, right, in a way that's more concrete. I'm not saying that fiction can't reveal the human condition; it can, but it is an interesting concept that somehow that's the only way that's a main way to get to truth. I find that
Right.
complicated or difficult to swallow.
Well, I'll disagree a little bit. I think that, well, writers, yeah, have accomplishments that I don't, fiction writers,
Yes, sure.
and fiction writers often are incredibly thoughtful people who
Yes. No,
will,
yeah.
kind of leave you disturbed in a good way by their work, as Ellison often does. I think it's just, again, I'm not criticizing Ellison the writer as much as Ellison the persona,
Right.
and that sort of, as you said, the oracular or Olympian sort of claim about being a writer with a capital W.
Well, I'll put it this way. I think that I have no mouth and I must scream, which we'll talk about in the next episode more in
Hmm.
detail, or Repent Harlequin to the TikTok Man. Both give some insight into kinds of authoritarianism, um, especially Harlequin. I have no mouth. It's more about the dangers of AI, maybe. Um, and I think that certainly someone could intuit and learn something about a certain kind of authoritarian governance from Harlequin that they might not get from reading Guillermo O'Donnell's book on authoritarianism or whatever the case may be. But I think ultimately, I don't think that, I think that if you really want to understand things like the rise of Nazism in Germany or to understand the collapse of democracy in Chile in 1973 or whatever comes to mind, I don't know. I think literature can help illuminate, but I don't think it is able to communicate understanding in the same way that sometimes some authors think that it can. Um, Truth still becomes, well, I'm going to go down a whole other rabbit hole. But anyway, again, this idea of the Oracle, I have some skepticism about its capacity to fully deliver on its own promises. I think that's what I'm saying. And again, with Ellison in particular, as we get into the other, start talking about his writing soon, I'm less convinced of the deep human insights that it provides because of the kinds of stories he writes.
Yeah, well, we'll get
Anyway,
to that in the next
we'll get to that later.
episode.
Yeah.
We've been teeing that up
Preview.
quite a lot. All right, our typical wrap up question: did you have any Harlan Ellison related merch?
No, I mean it's just books. I mean, I think in the closest I come, I do have a first edition of Dangerous Visions
Yeah,
that I came across by accident, I think, but
yeah, and I
that's as
had
close as
the
it
I
gets.
had the Change of Hobbit manuscripts,
Right.
which I dearly wish I had not lost because I do
Sure.
like those stories quite a lot. Is there anything you wish you had?
The one other thing I did have, I'm going to use this as my wish because I'm mad at myself. So I did record some episodes of Hour 25 back in the day, and I had the first time Harlan read Paladin of the Lost Hour. It was a new story at the time, and I had him reading it on cassette, and I thought I had saved those cassettes, and I think I tossed them when it moved. So I wish I had that back.
Yes. Well, listen, kids, getting older is just all kinds of regret. I regret losing those manuscripts. You regret
Yep,
losing
yep,
the
yep,
cassette tapes.
yep.
I wish I had, if there's anything I wish I had, other than a telepathic dog who would be my best friend, which is a boy and his dog. That's what the story is about. I I really like, it was very emblematic of Harlan Ellison in my mind, the Leo and Diane Dillon art on the
Oh,
paperbacks.
sure.
Yeah, I know they have a book. I don't have it. I probably should get that. But if I, had some, sort of a reproduction of that, that'd be great because I really love their style, and not just that, but for all the good things about Harlan Ellison's writing, it would be a good reminder of that.
Fair enough.
Okay. Well, that does it for our first part of the Harlan Ellison extravaganza. Tune in next time for when we talk about his short stories. And we'll see you then.
See you then.
Now that our typewriter ribbon has run out of ink, we have to conclude this episode of Ancient Geeks. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe and leave a review on the podcast app of your choice. Or drop us a line at someancientgeeks@gmail.com. Look for us also on Substack at someancientgeek.substack.com, where we post, pretty much daily. And also find us on Reddit, Facebook, Blue Sky, and other social media outlets. All content is copyright 2026, Tom Grant and Stephen Taylor. Music by Reversed Image, whom you can find on Pixabay. See you next time.
So now there's a case of creative interference, if you really want to get down to it.
Yeah, of course there is. There's always, there are writers and artists of any stripe who will change their work for whatever reasons. I'm very sticky about it. I resist that kind of thing. If I do it right, fine. But I've had producers and editors say to me, hey, look, take a look at this, and this doesn't seem right. And I'll look at it and I'll say, yeah, you're right. The words are not engraved in gold, but they are my words, and I want them done the way I want them. I don't want some other head changing them.